Let's come back to the continent and take a look at peacekeeping efforts in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been experiencing insecurity in some parts of the country for a number of years now. With the president of the country, Felix Tshisekedi, saying to the United Nations that the MONUSCO troops should leave the country. We speak to Joseph Ochieno, a writer and commentator on African affairs, about this. Thank you very much, Mr. Ochieno, for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's start with an assessment of how effective peacekeeping by the United Nations has been in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Peacekeeping operations and Chapter 7 of the UN Security Council, UN General Assembly, if you like, of the UN, as it were. I am not quite sure how successful they've been anywhere in the world, certainly not in Africa, except perhaps East Timor, 1999 or thereabouts. Generally, these are times for us to begin perhaps to review these operations, because they're extremely expensive operations, but also extremely dangerous operations for peacekeepers who are involved in these operations. As far as Congo is concerned, Congo is perhaps the disaster of the operations because it has been the longest operations, the largest operation, the longest actually in recent times, the largest operations globally, and one for which it's very difficult to tell how effective they've been. Whether or not President Tshisekedi now has a solution to it, I don't know. I think this calls for a total review of these operations by the UN agency. But I think from the African perspective, President Tshisekedi is a crying baby, in quote, in a good way, who's actually suggesting that he may be hungry, things may not be going on very well. He perhaps needs help. I'm not yet sure how much, if like as a solution, he's put on the table. I think, unfortunately, Congo clearly needs help. Whether or not it needs help with the UN security officials or officers, I genuinely don't know thus far. It's one of the most unfortunate operations thus far, because in Congo, you can take in the last 10, 15 years very quickly. I can tell you that that is a country that has seen women and children particularly die and die and die when UN are watching, and die and die and die when forces from neighboring countries, especially Uganda and Rwanda, have actually gone and used that country as if it were merely a football field.
I'd like for us to take a look at the cause of the instability and what allows for it to rage on in 2023. You accuse its neighbors of invasion. What does that mean?
I do not accuse the neighbors of the invasion. It is true. The neighbors have invaded. In fact, they invaded and installed a president. They invaded and possibly quite rightly installed a president post Mobutu. Mobutu was substantially disliked on this continent. We particularly disliked him, including myself, who were then young students who knew that Mobutu, Kamuzu Banda, and a few others, who possibly not mentioned, were poodles to forces that were, if you like, Western Alliance forces that were opposed to African liberations and opposed to liberation struggles, particularly in Southern Africa. So those of us who were young African nationalists at the time, we almost don't apologize about that. But that said, it also happens the case that immediately Mobutu was toppled. The Kabila that replaced him was almost certainly toppled because he died in a circumstance which is quite strange. The next invasion were basically political invasion by neighboring countries. It nearly caused, actually, what they call Africa's First World War. So yes, these countries were involved, and had it not been actually, particularly for the result of interventions by SADC forces and SADC leaders, and some SADC leaders, many of whom were not particularly liked, but when they came to the reality of appreciating the reasons for the invasions, they said no. The reason why I would say that these are important backgrounds is because Congo is an extremely rich country, possibly the richest on the continent. It's an extremely large country, generally a very complicated country, but it's also the first African country from the 60s, from 1960, that saw its independence president, Patrice Lumumba. Many Africans like naming Lumumbas, but they act differently. Many individuals like to name Lumumba, but they act differently. Lumumba was assassinated. And since the assassination of Lumumba, with the exception of a few courageous leaders like Milton Obote and others, the The rest have really not helped to deal with the underlying causes, meaning support, if you like, the Lumumbist values in Congo. And so since then, granted, Mobutu came and took over. Post-Mobutu, and in much more recent times, there have been regimes that have been, if you like, the same as any other, serving the interests of many of these other countries to do nothing else but take power and, forget about the ordinary citizenry. In Congo, of course, you asked me in terms of background, because it's one of the richest countries, also the most exploited. There have been foreign forces and interests beyond Africans, and it's one of those countries which is extremely urgent that African leaders get up and take a position to support. Sure. And I'm not sure whether, yes.
All right. I use the word accuse because Rwanda vehemently opposes that, or rather has refuted that they have invaded. And on the part of Uganda, well, Yoweri Museveni sending in troops to say we are in the name of help, rather. So when you say African leaders need to urgently do something, not just for the mineral wealth, but the human life that you speak of, when you see the visuals, either children digging in mines or women bearing children, men as well, crossing over to other parts to seek refuge. What has disallowed for leaders on the continent to get a handle on the heart of Africa?
The invasion specifically I was referring to is the earlier invasions. The more recent ones can be contested, like Museveni can say he was invited, but we knew he's there really to serve a very specific interest. I don't want to concentrate on that. Congo was invaded by Uganda and Rwanda, post-Mobutu Kabila one, just like they invaded post-Mobutu, to get rid of Mobutu. But, Uganda was invaded too, if you like, by Tanzania, backed by many others. And my political party, the political party, at least I support, UPC, it was leading that operation to get rid of Idi Amin. So some of these invasions can happen, so it's neither here nor there, the background. As I said, there was consensus against Mobutu. There was no consensus post any other invasion since then. Right now, it's very clearly the case that many African countries, like neighboring Rwanda, Uganda, these countries export gold, and if you trace an audit of the gold that they export, you cannot really find them on a local mine, whether it's somewhere in Pretoria or somewhere in the outskirts of Harare or indeed in the outskirts of Kampala. Those are the realities. So leaders have been involved in this, and leaders have worked with the external, meaning non-African forces and interests, to exploit that country. And you're talking quite right about the mining operations by the children in that country. It's extraordinary. Most of these are child little children who should be going to school rather than mining for survival, the kind of thing that you can only see in the streets of Kampala with Karamojong, little girls carrying other little children, when Karamoja in Uganda is amongst the richest places. I'm giving you context because part of this is about peacekeeping operations, and one of the issues we see, why do we do this? When you have a failed state, when you have a failed political systems, when you have a nation in which there is no consensus, and when you have a region where there are no leaders who can compel the rulers or leaders in their respective neighborhoods and to come together and sit and resolve conflicts and then seek national consensus, create democratic space in which everybody should be governed with their mandate. But also when you know that when you govern with the mandate, it's very likely that those who are leading have got they're held to account. So it means, therefore, that minerals in that country, agricultural produce in those countries, are accountable. Are used, if you like, for the interest of the nation. And then those other people who come, they come in as visitors or partners with trade pacts rather than basically, as I said, colonizers.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we can afford this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Joseph Ochieno is a writer and a commentator on African affairs. More news.